Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Malta Hypogeum, underground temple older than Stonehenge with impassable acoustics. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In 1902, workers drilling foundations for a house in Paola, Malta, broke through the ceiling of a chamber that had been sealed for 4,000 years. What they found below the streets of a quiet Mediterranean island was not a tomb, not a cellar, but an entire underground world. 3 floors of hand-carved limestone halls, altars, and chambers descending 20 meters into the bedrock, built without metal tools, without wheels, and without any written instructions. The Hypogeum of Ħal Saflieni is the oldest known underground temple on Earth, constructed somewhere between 3,600 and 2,500 BCE, making it older than the Great Pyramid, older than Stonehenge, and older than almost every monumental structure our ancestors ever attempted. It was carved by people we know almost nothing about, using tools made of bone, stone, and antler, into rock so hard that modern stonemasons marvel at the precision of the cuts. But the architecture is not the deepest mystery. When researchers from the University of Malta began measuring the acoustic properties of the Hypogeum's inner chambers in the 1990s, they discovered something that should not exist in a hand-carved prehistoric cave. The oracle room, a small chamber on the middle level, produces a resonance frequency of exactly 110 hertz, a frequency that, when generated inside the human skull, has been shown in neuroscience studies to suppress the rational left hemisphere and activate the emotional and spatial right hemisphere. The ancient builders, it appears, had engineered an acoustic effect that alters human consciousness. Whether they understood the neuroscience behind it or simply discovered through ritual practice that certain sounds in certain spaces produced religious experiences, we cannot say. What we can say is that the effect is real, measurable, and cannot be accidental. More than 7,000 human remains were discovered inside the Hypogeum when it was excavated. Were they buried here, or were they brought here to experience the sound? Did priests chant in the oracle room to produce visions in the faithful gathered below? And why, when the site was finally closed to mass tourism in the 1990s to prevent further damage, did several visitors report hearing voices? And one famous expedition in the 1930s claimed that a group of visitors who entered a lower passage never came out. The Hypogeum is hiding something. The question is whether we are sophisticated enough yet to understand what it is. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the global puzzle of unexplained ancient construction, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Archaeology is, by its nature, an incomplete science. We find only what survives, and what survives is determined not by importance, but by durability. Stone lasts, wood rots, metal corrodes, ceramics endure. The written word survives only if it is inscribed on stone or baked clay. Papyrus and vellum are hostages to humidity and fire. This means that every picture of the past, assembled from archaeological evidence, is a distortion, biased toward the materials that happen to last, rather than the activities that define the culture. With that caveat in place, the structures that do survive from the ancient world are sometimes inexplicable by any conventional model of the societies that built them. Fine stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters, transported from quarries dozens of kilometers away, and raised to heights that challenge modern cranes. We find astronomical alignments so precise that they track the movements of specific stars over periods of thousands of years. We find architectural proportions that embed mathematical ratios, pi, phi. The Pythagorean theorem in civilizations that supposedly had no formal mathematics. The challenge these structures pose is not engineering alone. It is conceptual. How did people without our tools conceive of projects on this scale? How did they solve the organizational problems of feeding and coordinating tens of thousands of workers over decades? How did they transmit technical knowledge across generations without standardized notation? The buildings stand as proof that they did it. The question of how remains genuinely open. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Malta Hypogeum, underground temple older than Stonehenge with impassable acoustics, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Hypogeum of Ħal Saflieni was carved entirely by hand from coralline limestone, using tools made of flint, bone, and antler. Radiocarbon dating places its construction between 3,600 and 2,500 BCE, predating Stonehenge by at least 6 centuries and the Egyptian pyramids by nearly 1,000 years. The structure descends 3 levels to a depth of approximately 10 meters below the modern street surface and contains an estimated 500 square meters of carved space. Archaeologists estimate that roughly 7,000 individuals were interred within its chambers over many centuries, suggesting it served as both a ritual space and a communal ossuary for Malta's prehistoric population. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the acoustic properties of the oracle room were first formally measured by researcher Igor Riznikov and later by a team from the Acoustics Research Center at the University of Salford. They found that the chamber sustains a resonance frequency of approximately 110 Hz, regardless of the pitch at which a sound is introduced. A 2008 study by Dr. Ian Cook and colleagues at UCLA found that exposure to 110 Hz stimulation causes a measurable shift in brain activity, reducing prefrontal cortex engagement and increasing limbic and right hemisphere activation, essentially the neurological signature of trance or altered states. The same 110 Hz resonance has since been measured at other Neolithic sites, including Newgrange and the Campster Round Cairn in Scotland. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. The site was discovered accidentally in 1902 when a property developer's workers broke through a ceiling while excavating foundations. The initial excavation was conducted by Maltese archaeologist Themistokles Zammit between 1903 and 1911. Despite its extraordinary significance, the site received relatively little international attention for decades. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. Annual visitor numbers were capped at approximately 80 per day after it was found that the warmth and humidity produced by crowds of tourists was causing irreversible deterioration of the ochre pigment decorations on the walls, some of the oldest pigment art in the Mediterranean world. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, among the thousands of skeletal remains recovered from the Hypogeum, archaeologists found evidence of a people who were biologically distinct from modern Maltese islanders. A study published in 2019 in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology analyzed ancient DNA from these remains and found that Malta's temple-building population shared genetics with early Neolithic farmers who spread from Anatolia across the Mediterranean around 7000 BCE. This population appears to have died out or been completely replaced by a genetically different group around 2500 BCE, precisely the period when the temple-building culture of Malta also disappeared, leaving behind no architectural successors and no explanation for why they stopped building. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of the Hypogeum's main hall features a corbelled ceiling carved to resemble a structural arch, despite being cut from solid rock, an artistic imitation of above-ground architecture in a subterranean space. The decorative red ochre spirals painted on the ceilings of several chambers have been dated to approximately 300 BCE, making them among the oldest surviving painted decorations in any enclosed structure anywhere on Earth. The paint was made from red ochre mixed with animal fat, a binding agent that has preserved it for over 5 millennia. The spiral motif recurs throughout Maltese temple art and bears a close resemblance to contemporaneous spiral art found in Ireland, Brittany, and Iberia, suggesting some form of cultural contact or shared symbolic tradition across the Neolithic Atlantic world. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. A 1940 National Geographic article by journalist Lois Jessup described leading a tourist group into a lower passage of the Hypogeum, where her guide refused to enter a specific low crawlway. According to Jessup's account, several members of her party descended into the passage and in the days afterward reported vivid hallucinations, and one group allegedly disappeared entirely, a claim that has never been verified or officially investigated. While this story is almost certainly apocryphal, it catalyzed decades of occult interest in the site. More verifiably, several academic researchers who have spent extended periods recording in the Oracle Room have reported disorientation, a sense of presence, and in one case temporary hearing disturbance after sustained exposure to the chamber's standing wave resonance. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Malta Hypogeum underground temple older than Stonehenge with impassable acoustics. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation, proposed by researchers, holds that the consciousness engineering theory holds that the Hypogeum's builders deliberately designed the oracle room to produce the 110 Hz resonance as a tool for ritual-altered states. Proponents point to the precisely carved hemispherical hollow above the oracle niche, which appears acoustically optimized, and to the recurring pattern of 110 Hz resonance at other Neolithic sites. Critics argue that without written records, we cannot attribute intent to a measurement coincidence, and that prehistoric builders lacked the understanding of physics required to engineer a specific frequency outcome, though proponents counter that empirical testing through trial and error across generations could have achieved the same result. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the necromancy oracle theory proposes that the Hypogeum functioned as an oracular center where priests would enter the oracle room while the congregation remained in the main hall below. The acoustic properties of the oracle room allow a voice speaking at normal volume inside it to be heard clearly in the hall outside, while voices in the hall do not penetrate the oracle room. This natural one-way amplification would have created the auditory illusion of a disembodied voice speaking from the walls, precisely the effect attributed to oracles across the ancient Mediterranean. The same acoustic trick has been identified at Chavan de Huantar in Peru, suggesting this may have been a widespread architectural strategy for religious theater. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the astronomical alignment theory argues that the Hypogeum structure encodes astronomical knowledge, with the main axis aligning with the winter solstice sunrise and certain chambers designed to trap specific starlight at particular times of year. Researcher Tor Lamsdalen has documented several putative alignments between the Hypogeum's corridors and significant solar and lunar positions. Mainstream archaeologists largely reject this interpretation as pattern matching, noting that in a multi-chambered complex of this size, some alignments with astronomical events are statistically inevitable. The debate remains unresolved because the site's depth underground makes direct astronomical observation impossible from within. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers working from the same body of evidence reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Malta Hypogeum, underground temple older than Stonehenge with impassable acoustics, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the 110 Hz resonance in the oracle room is a physically measured, reproducible phenomenon documented by multiple independent research teams using calibrated acoustic equipment. The chamber's shape, a roughly hemispherical hollow cut into limestone with a specific ceiling curvature, is consistent with acoustic engineering for bass resonance amplification. When a sound at 110 Hz is introduced anywhere in the chamber, it sustains significantly longer than sounds at other frequencies, a phenomenon called modal resonance that requires precise dimensional relationships between the chamber's height, width, and ceiling curvature. These dimensions cannot be accidental in a carved space where the builders controlled every measurement. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented the 7,000 skeletal remains found in the Hypogeum represent one of the largest prehistoric assemblages in the Mediterranean. Many skeletons show evidence of secondary burial, meaning the bodies were first buried elsewhere, allowed to decompose, and then the bones were gathered and placed in the Hypogeum. This two-stage burial practice is consistent with ancestor veneration traditions found across Neolithic Europe, suggesting the site served as a permanent repository for honored dead rather than a simple cemetery. Several skulls show signs of deliberate elongation through cranial binding in infancy, a practice also documented in contemporaneous Neolithic cultures in Iberia and the Levant. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the carved decorative ceiling of the main hall imitates the corbelled roof construction technique used in Malta's above-ground megalithic temples, but rendered in solid rock rather than stacked stones. This implies that the Hypogeum's builders were simultaneously constructing above-ground temples using corbelling technology and chose to replicate that aesthetic underground, where it serves no structural purpose. This cross-referencing between subterranean and surface architecture suggests the two types of sacred space were conceptually unified in the builder's worldview, the underground Hypogeum and the surface temples forming a single ritual landscape connecting the living, the dead, and whatever divine forces the builders were trying to reach. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Malta Hypogeum, underground temple older than Stonehenge with impassable acoustics. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present live. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Hypogeum today is one of the most carefully protected prehistoric sites on Earth. Following a period in the 1970s and 1980 when thousands of visitors per day were admitted, causing catastrophic humidity damage to the wall paintings, Heritage Malta now caps visits at 80 people per day, with tours departing in small groups. Waiting times for tickets can run to several weeks during peak season, making the Hypogeum one of the most exclusive archaeological experiences in the world. Conservation work is ongoing, with particular attention to maintaining the precise temperature and humidity levels that have preserved the ochre decorations for 5,000 years. Acoustic research at the site has intensified since 2000, with the Hypogeum becoming one of the most studied prehistoric acoustic environments in the world. In 2014, the Acoustics study group on music archaeology conducted a comprehensive acoustic survey and confirmed the extraordinary properties of the oracle room while adding new data on the acoustic properties of other chambers. The ongoing challenge is that the most invasive and potentially revealing research, including further excavation of the lowest, largely unexplored third level, has been prohibited to prevent damage. What lies in the deepest chambers of the Hypogeum remains, in the most literal sense, an open question. The site continues to anchor Malta's identity as home to the world's oldest architectural tradition, and new ancient DNA studies are actively working to establish who the builders were, where they came from, and what ultimately happened to them. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Malta Hypogeum, underground temple older than Stonehenge with impassable acoustics. From the historical record, rough the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Malta ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documento, why is real? The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.